Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. NFL Draft Week is upon us. We're going to do a mock draft video, and I'm not going to drag it out and extend it. It'll be short, sweet, and to the point. We're going to do a mock draft that I conducted via Pro Football Focus and their board and their evaluations. And we're going to do one without trades, and we're going to do one with trades. This one is without trades. And certainly atypical circumstances for Green Bay. They are entering a draft for the first time since 1986 without a first-round pick. Of course, that's because of the Micah Parsons trade that was conducted last offseason by general manager Brian Gutekunst, in accordance, of course, with the Dallas Cowboys, who received Green Bay's first-round pick this year and next year, along with Kenny Clark. I still do believe, even though Green Bay, as of right now, isn't slated to pick until number 52 overall, and I say as of now because, of course, Goody might slide up, might slide back. We'll have to wait and see. There's always hype, energy surrounding your team when the NFL draft rolls around. And so I said we were going to do two videos. This is the first of the two, and it's a mock draft without trades. So we're saying Green Bay enters this bad boy with 8 selections. We're going to exit it with 8, and we're going to keep them as is where they're at. And again, that would be stunning to see because Goody is one of the more aggressive general managers when it comes to navigating around the draft. Again, whether that's moving up, moving back, trying to accumulate as many picks as possible typically is the path that he and the rest of the brain trust for Green Bay likes to take. So number 52 overall is our first selection. And is it a pick that's going to jump off the page? Is it deemed like one of those, sexy picks? No, probably not. It's an offensive lineman. It's a road grader, and it's ignore my jacket, by the way, because you're going to think I'm biased, right? But it's Jennings Dunker, the offensive lineman out of Iowa. And I think the interesting thing to note here is I say offensive lineman out of Iowa. So I took Jennings Dunker at 52 overall. With Dunker, Green Bay adds a versatile depth piece to its offensive line, and we know how much Green Bay values versatility up front with the big boys. Dunker primarily played tackle at Iowa, projects to be a guard in the NFL because of his frame and his fit, and he was asked about this at the Senior Bowl a few months back, and Dunker was really blunt. He said he's down to play any position that's asked, and he mentioned at the time, again, this was back at the Senior Bowl, he had mentioned that he had been repping at both tackle and guard in the lead up to the draft, which is just music to the ears of Brian Gutekunst and company. The Packers have what we believe is their starting 5 cemented in, right? It's going to be Jordan Morgan at left tackle, Aaron Banks back at left guard. You re-signed Sean Rhyan to an extension for him to be the center because Elgton Jenkins is gone, and of course Morgan's at left tackle because Rasheed Walker's gone. Right guard, you're probably going to have Anthony Belton, right? And then Zach Tom, who Goody mentioned. I'm recording and publishing this on a Tuesday, and Goody mentioned in his press conference earlier this morning on Tuesday that Zach Tom did undergo surgery in the offseason for the patellar tendon injury, should be ready for training camp. But it should be Morgan, Banks, Ryan, Belton, and Zach Tom. Beyond the starting 5, now Goody said that he doesn't agree with some of the analysts about Green Bay's depth on the offensive line. He believes it's there. Now, they brought back Darian Kennard, who filled in admirably at times last year. You still have Jacob Monk in the fold. Travis Glover's still there. John Williams, a 7th-round pick out of Cincinnati last year. But to me, there's just a lot of question marks about the depth. You bring in Dunker, and you look at how Iowa has developed offensive linemen under Kirk Ferentz for the last 2+ decades. You're probably getting a guy who you can slot in at left guard or right guard for the next decade. Now, would it be as early as this year? Maybe not, because Dunker probably only plays if there's an injury somewhere else. Maybe he, battles for that right guard spot with Anthony Belton and potentially could win that if Green Bay ends up going this route. Of course, with the mock draft that, I conducted here. But with Dunker, you get a valuable piece on the chessboard even as a rookie, a guy who can play guard, can play tackle, can fill in if there's an injury. And we saw plenty of injuries with the offensive line last year, right? Like we saw a lot of it. Zach Tom was in and out of the lineup, Aaron Banks, Elgton Jenkins, list really goes on and on and on and on. So you get a solidified depth piece at minimum to start with, and a guy that you could plug or play at tackle or guard, again, although he projects to be a guard given his frame and fit at the next level. So at number 52 overall, I went Jennings Dunker out of Iowa. So we go to round 3. It's number 84 overall. Again, this was a mock draft I did with no trades involved whatsoever. And at number 84 overall, I went Dalen Everett, the cornerback out of Georgia. And there's a couple reasons why. One, Goody didn't mind showing his hand, and I don't think there was any gamesmanship involved here. I think it was true to the core. Goody said at his press conference on Tuesday, 2 days before the draft, depending on when you're watching this, that Green Bay will be at, he was asked about the cornerback position and how they're approaching it with the draft, and he said they will be adding numbers there, and he used the plural form. He did not say, yeah, we're going to add a guy, at least one player there. He said, we are going to add numbers there, and I think he's telling the truth there. Cornerback certainly going into the draft is a position that almost every analyst has said is a major need for Green Bay. We saw the play at cornerback really tail off in the second half of the season once Micah Parsons went down, and there was that domino effect of getting less pressure on the quarterback, putting more on the plate of your corners, and they just, as a group, I'm not going to, single out one player in particular, but just didn't deliver. And I think this cornerback room is missing a true number one. Now, is Dalen Everett going to be that on day one? No, but could he develop into that? Yeah, I could see that happening. And with how this mock draft played out, at number 84 overall, where some people have him going, maybe 10, 15, 20 slots higher, he kind of just fell into Green Bay's lap in our mock draft simulator here. And it just so happens that he plays a position of need for the Packers. I mentioned how the cornerback position left a lot to be desired, and Everett, gives you an immediate jolt, a plug-and-play option to an extent, potentially as a rookie. And most importantly for me is he has the desired frame, the ideal size that Green Bay typically targets in the draft when it comes to the cornerback position. He's listed at 6'1", 193 pounds. Logged 41 games in his career at Georgia. Film room shows a sound athlete who's always under control, has good agility. And we know Green Bay, under Brian Gutekunst, has had an affinity for drafting Georgia defensive players. They took 2 in the first round a few years ago with Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt. Of course, Eric Stokes in that mix as well. Last year, drafted Warren Brinson late, a defensive tackle out of Georgia, and then picked up Nazir Stackhouse, his Georgia teammate, in undrafted free agency. So Green Bay, for one reason or other, and obviously Georgia has had wild successes under Kirby Smart, especially with a lot of those defenses. Green Bay continually targets Georgia defensive players, and I have them going Dalen Everett in round 3 at number 84 overall. So we move ahead to number 120. By the way, Mitch, I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciative of all the support. We're doing a Packers mock draft simulator that I conducted via PFF and their board and how it kind of unraveled for us, and we're doing a mock draft here with no trades. 4th round, I doubled up. I took Will Lee III, another cornerback from Texas A&M. Shows at least what I think, and I don't believe I'm in the minority. I think the majority of Packer fans would like to see them address cornerback early in the draft. You have to remember the last 4 drafts, Green Bay's drafted 3 corners, but all 3 were in the 7th round. Micah Robinson last year, who was plucked off the practice squad in October by Tennessee. Kalen King, who's no longer on the team, and then Carrington Valentine, who still is on the team for Green Bay and was a primary starter last year for the Packers. But there hasn't been in the draft a premier pick, an early draft pick used on corner since the Packers. It would have been since they took Stokes in the first round 5 years ago, I think that would have been. It's just been one 7th round pick after another, and there was one draft peppered in there in the last 4 years where they didn't even draft a corner. I have them going corner round 3 with Dalen Everett and back-to-back in round 4 with Will Lee. And I couldn't help but remember Goody's first draft ever as the general manager of the Packers, 2018, round 1. He goes Jair Alexander, cornerback out of Louisville. Round 2, he goes Josh Jackson, cornerback out of Iowa. One worked out incredibly well. Those last couple of years, a lot of injuries, unknowns with Jair, but overall, his Packers career, he played at an all-pro level when he was healthy and on the field. Josh Jackson, it did not work out, but Goody doubled up at corner in rounds 1 and 2 in his first ever draft as GM. I have him doubling up at corner rounds 3 and 4, in Green Bay going Everett and then Will Lee. And you talk about the phrase, if we want to dive into it briefly, doubling up in the draft at a position. Green Bay, under Goody, especially at offensive line, I wrote an article last week, and it was, I want to say the number was 4 of the last 5 drafts Green Bay has taken multiple offensive linemen, or it was something like that, but 3 of the 4 they took 3 offensive linemen. And last year we saw them double up at wide receiver early. Matthew Golden round 1, Savion Williams round 3. And so this is not like a foreign concept to Goody in the front office and the powers that be. They will double up at positions. A lot of teams do. But doubling up early is also something that they have done. They just did it at wide receiver last year. And pre-draft visits, a lot of people like to invest a lot of time and thought into them. I do think they're valuable, and they can kind of lead a trail of breadcrumbs into what a team is thinking and maybe some players that they're really interested in entering a draft. And last year alone, the Packers had Matthew Golden, Anthony Belton, and Savion Williams all in for 3 of their 30 pre-draft visits, and those 3, of course, ended up getting drafted by Green Bay in rounds 1, 2, and 3. And when the draft came and went a year ago, we exited that with Green Bay ending up with 5 players that they had in for pre-draft visits with the 30 that they're allotted to use. They brought in Will Lee, this cornerback out of Texas A&M, right, for a pre-draft visit. And like Everett, he has the size at the position that Green Bay favors. He's 6'1", 190 pounds. Showed he was better in man coverage than zone coverage. Projects to stick on the boundary. I don't think there's much flexibility with putting him at the slot. Who knows? I know Goody said they don't need an overhaul at cornerback like back in January, but now he's saying 2 days before the draft they're going to add numbers at the position. And so I have them taking Will Lee, a corner, has the ideal size, the frame. They double up at the position, and it's a player who they brought in for a pre-draft visit. We go to round 5, and we're sticking with defense. I know we went offensive line with Dunker, and then we went back-to-back cornerbacks with Everett and Lee. Albert Regis. Now we're doubling up on Aggies, Texas A&M players. Round 5, I went Albert Regis, 153rd overall, defensive lineman out of Texas A&M. If Jonathan Gannon wants a nose tackle who can clog up the middle for years to come, I know it's a 5th-round pick, and you're kind of getting to that range where you're starting to take a flyer on a player. Regis has the potential to be the guy that can just, clog up the middle. I was reading some of his draft profiles, and the one on NFL.com described Regis. I just thought it was a great way to put it. And then I went and watched some of his tape. They described Regis on NFL.com in his draft profile as a leverage monster who can function as a tree stump in the middle of a defense. And I was like, wow, that's actually glowing praise. It doesn't sound like it, right? But for a defensive lineman who you want to just clog up the middle, describing him as a leverage monster who can function as a tree stump in the middle of a defense is pretty damn good. It's just a tremendous description of the run-clogging defensive lineman out of Texas A&M. I know Green Bay has Devontae Wyatt. They brought in Javon Hargrave in free agency, the veteran who's, 33 years old. Are either of those guys true nose tackles to the T, or are they just interior defensive linemen that can kind of bop around? I think Regis could learn from Hargrave early on, who, he's not going to be in Green Bay, Hargrave, for like 3-4 years. He's 33 years old. It'll be a brief pit stop, at least, that would probably be what both sides are assuming going into this relationship with Hargrave coming over to Green Bay. And then maybe Regis potentially down the road gets plugged in between the guards at some point if he develops and kind of sort of earns his keep. And so why not go back-to-back Aggies on defense, a corner and a defensive lineman? What do we got? 1, 2, 3. We've got 4 picks left. We're halfway through. Again, this is a mock draft. Mitch M on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Packers mock draft with no trades. 2 5th-round picks. The first, we selected Regis. The second, we're going to go running back. I went Kalen Black out of Indiana. Another pre-draft visitor, I should say, lands in Green Bay. Might have been a bit of a reach at 160 if you kind of chart out where Kalen Black is projected to be selected in the draft, but he comes from a championship environment at Indiana, followed Curt Cignetti from James Madison to Indiana. He's described by many evaluators as a grinder who's just going to get every yard that's blocked for. Does a lot of his stuff, jump out and wow you when you watch Kalen Black? No, he's just a solid, fundamentally sound running back who, again, he comes from that championship environment and pedigree. It sounds crazy to still say that with Indiana as a football program, but they are your national champions under Curt Cignetti. The Packers, meanwhile, are in a pretty peculiar spot at running back. Josh Jacobs is back. He's going to be your bell cow. But with Emmanuel Wilson off to Seattle, it leaves a gap there because Emmanuel Wilson was your always ready, always available number 2 running back. And it was supposed to be Marshawn Lloyd, but he's only played 1 game in 2 years because of all the injuries that he has sustained. And so now you're entering this year and you're like, okay, Josh Jacobs should be the bell cow. You'd prefer to have Marshawn Lloyd as your backup, but what does that look like? Is he going to be able to stay healthy for any prolonged period of time? You kind of just cross your fingers and hope at this point. And you re-sign Chris Brooks on a 2-year deal, but Chris Brooks is best served as like a situational running back. Maybe bring him in on some third downs. He's your best pass blocking running back. But if he's your number 2, who has to be your number 1, if Josh Jacobs gets dinged up a little bit like he did last year, you're really stretching things pretty thin at the running back position. So I have them taking Kalen Black here in the 5th round, and maybe he could carve out a small role early on if there are injuries. If health isn't an issue, he's just like a great depth piece to stash for later on down the road. And so I took Kalen Black out of Indiana. Round 6, number 201 overall. I went quarterback. I did. I went Cade Klubnik out of Clemson. I think there's enough intrigue to see if you can develop him to a point where maybe he's just a good backup quarterback behind Jordan Love. Malik Willis is gone. Really comes down to your belief in Desmond Ridder and Kyle McCord, and/or Kyle McCord. The Packers, could be itching to draft and develop another young quarterback. Klubnik was ticketed to be like a first, early second-round pick entering last season, and his play in 2025 was just wildly inconsistent, as it was for Dabo's Clemson Tigers program as a whole. He being Klubnik, like sneaky athleticism when you watch him, and he thrived attacking zone defensive looks, I should say. But at times it seemed like this, and this is what a lot of the evaluators said, when the game would speed up, it caused Klubnik to get out of sorts. And if the game was speeding up at the college level and it caused him to get out of sorts, you can't imagine right away it'd be much better in the NFL. I think we see that a lot in the NBA. A lot of these players in the NBA, they come out after, the benefit, I guess, if you want to look at it this way in college, is you can't just be a one and done when it comes to college football. In college basketball, you can. And so you have a 19-year-old getting drafted to the NBA, and sometimes you see that big jump from maybe year 2 to year 3 or year 1 to year 2. And the players are constantly asked why once they're, 21, 22 years old, like, hey, what caused the bit? And, they can always say, oh, work ethic in the offseason, grinded. But a lot of them say the game slowed down. Like, the game just started to slow down for me. And so I think if Cade Klubnik, and a lot of the evaluations you see are, man, when the game sped up for him and he had to process more quickly, that's when things kind of went haywire and things would get chaotic. And so whoever drafts Cade Klubnik has to find a way to better that, to sort of rein that in. Goody has talked about it constantly before because he's asked about it a lot, just cycling in younger quarterbacks via the draft to try and develop them. Klubnik could be the latest, and you're only using a 6th-round pick on him. And again, it's a guy who many had ticketed to be a first or 2nd-round pick entering last season. 2 picks left. We're at number 236 overall. I took J. Michael Sturdivant, the wide receiver out of Florida. The statistics do not jump off the page. They just don't. But all the other numbers do. Sturdivant, 6'2", ran a 4.4 second 40-yard dash at the combine, had an absolutely mind-boggling 9.96 RAS score, and Goody will deny to this day that the Packers look or value the RAS formula specifically, says they have their own formulas. Maybe it's just a wild coincidence that the Packers tend to draft a lot of freak athletes who have wildly high RAS scores. I'm looking at Sturdivant. It's a 7th-round pick, and he's 6'2", and he ran a blazing 40-yard dash at the combine and has that 9.96 RAS score, which, by the way, ranks 17th out of 3,844 wide receivers dating back to 1987. If you're drafting Sturdivant, whoever takes him, you're drafting someone based on the potential and the traits, not what showed up in the box score at Florida. I just think he checks a lot of the typical Green Bay boxes when it comes to wide receiver. Freakish athlete, has the height and the frame, has the speed and the ability to take the lid off a defense. You're just checking one box after another. Finally, the last pick, number 255 overall. Again, mock draft for the Packers. This one we're not including in any sort of trades. I took Xavier Sori Jr., a linebacker out of Arkansas, who, by the way, I think it's worth noting because it is Green Bay, spent the first 3 years of his collegiate career at Georgia before spending his final, I think it was 2 years. I think he was a 5-year player. His last 2 years at Arkansas. And if you want to piggyback off Sturdivant, who I just mentioned, you know, an athletic marvel that you'd be getting in round 7, when you talk about the linebacker position and you talk about great athletic prospects, Sori fits the description. He's also a linebacker who had alarming problems finishing tackles in college, struggled working through blockers, hence the reason he'll likely be a late selection, potentially could go undrafted. Like Sturdivant, I think Sori has a I'm trying to let me find it real quick. He had a high RAS score. It wasn't 9.96 like Sturdivant's. I just need to find it. But I know he had a high RAS score, former Georgia Bulldog, just one of those freakish athletes at the linebacker position, although, you know, the red flags are, you know, somewhat alarming with his inability to finish tackles for large portions of his college career and struggled working through blockers. 8.85 RAS score. And just kind of another prospect that 7th round, you're taking a flyer. You like a couple of things. Let's take a shot here. And taking Sori is just that. You're drafting him on traits alone as a late flyer. See if you can develop him into something. And when you look at that linebacker position for Green Bay, it's pretty cemented in for 2026, even with the departure of Quay Walker to Las Vegas, because, of course, Green Bay went out earlier in the offseason and traded for Zaire Franklin, who's going to be 30 in July. But you have Zaire Franklin. You have Edgerrin Cooper next to him, and there's good depth, I think, at inside linebacker with Isaiah McDuffie back and whatever Green Bay makes of Tyron Hopper. Still kind of, you know, what was he, a 3rd-round pick a couple years ago, and we just haven't seen Tyron Hopper. But here they take Sori. It's just, you know, late 7th-round pick. Let's take a flyer on a guy who, you know, freak athlete at the linebacker position, some good traits, high RAS score. Let's, you know, put the name on the paper, hand it in, and see what we make of it. So that's how I had it playing out for Green Bay in this mock draft with no trades. Offensive lineman first. And, you know, as I thought about it, I was like, man, probably, you know, maybe should have doubled up on offensive line, and if it fell a certain way, I would have. But then you hear Goody talk on Tuesday, and he loves the depth that Green Bay has, which kind of pales in comparison to what a lot of these, you know, so-called experts are saying. But we went Jennings Dunker, offensive lineman, Iowa at number 52 overall. Then we doubled up at corner, rounds 3 and 4. Dalen Everett out of Georgia, Will Lee the 3rd out of A&M. 5th round, Albert Regis, defensive lineman out of A&M. 2nd, 5th round pick, we took Kalen Black, the running back out of Indiana. Cade Klubnik, quarterback out of Clemson, round 6. J. Michael Sturdivant, wide receiver out of Florida, round 7. And then last pick, 7th round, 255th overall, Xavier Sori, the linebacker out of Arkansas. So no tight end. I don't think safety is a big need. Of course, if the board falls a certain way and you're in the 4th, 5th round and the best available is a safety you have on your board, I could certainly see Green Bay maybe going that route. If they took a safety like round 2, that kid out of LSU that they had in for a visit, that would be kind of surprising, not because of the player or the prospect, but because of Green Bay not having a 1st-round pick and being pretty locked in at safety with its top 3 with Xavier McKinney and Evan Williams and Javon Bullard for this year and even beyond this year. So I didn't take a safety. I didn't take any specialist, no tight end. Did take a quarterback, Cade Klubnik, 6th round. See if you can develop the heck out of him and see what you can get. But that's how it felt for me, and I'm always curious. Let me know what you guys and gals think, what you would like to see Green Bay do, what you think they'll do. Will they stay at 52nd overall? If they do, what direction do you see them going? Which players are you kind of giddy about potentially being on the board once Green Bay's up on the clock at whatever stage in the 2nd round? It is Mitch M on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciative of all the support. We'll see you next time.